I'm joined now by Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, Democrat of Rhode Island. Senator, there are some fairly novel constitutional questions at issue here. It's a relatively unprecedented set of circumstances. Obviously, what Donald Trump did in the election was unprecedented. The pressure he put on his vice president, the vice president being subpoenaed by a special counsel. What's your reaction to this federal court ruling saying you've got to talk under oath?
I think it's a lot of good news. First, it signals that the federal investigation into the insurrection is alive and well. It's not just the Mar-a-Lago documents, because it involved Pence's role presiding over the Senate on that fateful day. Second, although the decision is sealed, it appears that the only protection Pence got was under the speech and debate clause protecting legislators, which is great for the rule of law, because an expansion of the executive privilege doctrine to cover this would have a very poor effect on congressional oversight. And third, it looks a lot like if you're the vice president and you're getting instructions from Trump on what you're supposed to do, that looks pretty executive. So it's, I think, pretty likely that the testimony that Jack Smith is seeking will be available to him in the grand jury, and it won't be protected by the speech and debate clause protection that the order apparently provided.
Yeah, that we should say that there is some interesting sort of constitutional grafting happening in the complaint by by Pence's people, basically saying he's got 1 foot in Article 1, where he's the president of the Senate. He's got 1 foot in Article 2. Wherever you need him, he can skip over to the other side, so you can never touch him. Looks like
exactly.
The judge.
If it's the legislature asking, I got executive privilege. Exactly. If it's the executive asking, I got speech and debate claause. Nobody can ask me anything, and that did not work.
No, that's exactly right. Well, clever, props for the attempt. But my next question from you, I guess, is, given your feelings about this current 6-3 conservative majority on the court, I mean, there are novel constitutional issues. It does seem like Pence is likely to appeal to this. Do you have confidence that this straightforward ruling will stand?
Well, he can continue to appeal it, but we've seen the courts get pretty impatient with these successive appeals in an ongoing investigation. With respect to Trump's lawyer, the appellate court flipped that reversal, the decision to uphold the district court around in no time at all. It's like an overnight ruling. So I don't think he's going to buy a whole lot of time, and I can't really say much more about the decision without reading it, except for the fact that he has to testify, being really good news, and executive privilege not covering it being good news for all Americans, because it allows separation of powers, congressional oversight to flourish.
You said something I want to come back to, because it hinted at a view I'd like you to sort of say more about the Mar-a-Lago case being important and Jack Smith pursuing that, but the sort of, I don't know, central primary importance to the life of the nation, to our shared understanding of what American democracy is, to the rule of law, about the ex-president's attempts to end America's self-governance in the form that we know it. Do you think there is a central importance to that? Do you think about these various cases and legal threats in a sort of tiered fashion in which that to you is the one that you feel most strongly about?
Yeah, I think the New York one is the least interesting. The Mar-a-Lago documents one is more interesting. The insurrection case is really, really interesting and significant, because not only is it a very significant case on the merits because of what happened that day, but you also have the overlay of Fani Willis's case in Georgia, which is looking at the same thing. And the evidence converges around that funny little character, Jeffrey Clark, who was operating in the Department of Justice, apparently on behalf of Trump, seeking to become Trump's attorney general, if you can believe it, by interfering more in the Georgia election. So it gets really interesting is if the Jack Smith federal investigation and the Fani Willis Georgia investigation end up supporting one another.
You've been very outspoken about both the Supreme Court and larger structural issues you see at play Two of them being the sort of lack of an ethics code. Justices don't have to mandatorily recuse, or they don't have to abide by the Article 3 code of ethics that applies to other judges. And two, the sort of dark money that has flowed into institutions around the court. Parties that are attempting to get favorable rulings from the court. And I want to, because of that, ask your response to something I think you tweeted about today, reporting that conservative activist group led by Virginia Ginni Thomas, of course, the wife of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, collected nearly $600,000 in anonymous donations to wage a cultural battle against the left over 3 years, a Washington Post investigation found. Do you think we should know who donors are to that kind of organization?
Yeah, without a doubt, because there's more to it than just that. The thing that made much of those donations anonymous was a thing called Donors Trust, which has been called the Koch brothers' dark money ATM. It's where you go to launder your identity off a donation. So somebody is behind that, and the fact that it's Donors Trust is a pretty big fingerprint. Donors Trust also shows up in the effort to pack the court with the right-wing justices. For instance, in 2019, Donors Trust funneled $7 million into the Federalist Society in 1 year. In 1 year, $7 million into the Federalist Society, while it was the epicenter of the secret wheeling and dealing that took place to get Gorsuch and then Kavanaugh and then Barrett onto the court. So the idea that this is not connected, $600,000 to the justice's wife, when the exact same group has done $7 million to the court packing scheme, there's a lot more here to look into.
Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, thank you for making some time with us tonight.
My pleasure.